Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Stitching Tales, a podcast about all things sewing and what it's really like to run a sewing business. I am Johanna Lundström of The Last Stitch.
And I am Malena and Hjerpe of Hazelhen Patterns.
And today we're going to talk about the devil of fabrics. Right.
The shiny fabrics that you all want to go for. That may not be the easiest one to handle.
No, yeah, it kind of lures us with that shiny thing. You almost get completely enticed by it, and then when you start to sew it that love and adoration soon turns to hate, right?
Yeah, you start to question everything in your life all of a sudden.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, usually you also paid a fair bit of money for that horrible experience. So what are we talking about in today's episode?
Yes, we are talking about slippery fabrics. We have had the woven episode. There was supposed to be 1 or 2 episodes where we're talking about different kind of weaves and different types of woven fabrics has now turned into a 3rd episode. But today I think we are going to reach the finish line.
Yeah.
We hope 100%.
So.
Yeah. And I have a little bit before we dig into that, which is a little bit the timing of this episode as well. I mentioned in a previous episode that I was going to move my office space. I'm going to rent a stage, literally a stage in a small theater. I mean, this is like a small, town theater, small town theater that has been turned into a bridal wear store. They sell both new and used bride dresses there. And they had some extra space, so I can rent the stage and have my office there. And the funny thing is, the owner was like asking, but are you interested in helping us out with some things like hemming the dresses or if I'm interested in doing any other alterations, which I'm like, I'm getting a pulse just thinking about it, but also like sewing parts of a dress, like for example, you can have a sleeveless dress, but then you add on like sheer fluid sleeves onto the dress. So
flowy
you can
sleeves, like that.
Yeah, flowy sleeves. Yeah, so you can a little bit mix and match what you want. So like sewing those types of components. So I'm a little bit like, am I gonna pivot into the bridal wear making? I'm thinking about it because it's like, are the stars aligning? There is a need on my street. There are already customers there. Like, it's an established place. I mean, the intro here is like, oh, those slippery fabrics are so difficult to work with. Oh no. It's like, should I get into that business?
Yeah. It's so funny. It's so funny because we love like this kind of fabrics and say that we don't really like working.
It's so advanced, like, oh my god.
Yeah, no. And we mostly focus on like functional garments, like everyday wear. That's what we the kind of patterns we design. That's what we like to sew mostly. And I mean, we both have done our fair share of formal wear, but that was a long time ago and not something that we kind of run towards. So it's kind of funny.
I have done a bridal, like I've done a bride dress. That was like the first job that I'd ever did. It was for a friend when we were studying. So I have dipped my toe into that lake, but yeah,
yeah, and that was a while, right? So
it was a while ago. Yes,
it was a while ago. Yeah. But this is so funny, and then I guess we should do, if this plan pans out, and you actually end up working for this company, this bridal company. It would be so fun to do a follow-up episode like Malena's journey into formal wear. That would be such an interesting episode, I think. And because I think a lot of you listeners as well is, we are kind of enticed by that world, but it also seems so intimidating, and you. And the price tag and all the the expensive fabrics that you have to work with. But I'm very, very excited. It's so weird because, as you said, we talked about this in a recent episode that it's named Sewing on Stage, actually, if you want to go back and listen to it. And now that idea, which in itself sounded really exciting, now you ended up, considering something, really interesting to actually start dipping your toe into working with bridal wear. Wow.
Yeah,
Who
I mean,
knew? Who
I'm
knew?
just playing with the idea so far. I haven't
Yeah.
committed to anything. Also with the time, like, what should you focus your time on? But the good thing is, like, I think, say that, I want to try out, like, do one or two hems, shorten the hems on some dress or skirt. Just try it out. And also, I mean, obviously I would try to do that on not the real garment first, like on just fabrics, to see how it actually is working, and what's it like working with it. I need a bit practice also before you would go into the real stuff. But yeah, it's just I mean, there are not that many opportunities, especially here in the northern part of Sweden, where there is a need for sewing, and on my street also. So it's like,
And
is the universe
such a-
telling me, giving me signs? Are the stars aligning?
Yeah.
Like, should I try at least?
Yeah. Because we the fans of you would love to that you take this. It's such a fascinating way of such an interesting possible pivot in a way, and also what are the odds, because you do live in a fairly small community. I wouldn't say it's a city. It's outside a larger city, but I mean,
No, it's a village basically.
it's
It's like
basically, I try to
6,000
be
people living here. Yeah.
So, I mean, just imagine the fact that on the same street that you have this bridal store, and that they also do customization. I mean, because you would assume that they would perhaps just sell stuff, but it's also nice to hear, because in a lot of countries, including Sweden, a lot of with the move away from custom and towards ready to wear, and nothing you can get custom. That means also that there is a lack of skilled craftspeople being able to sew. I mean, I can imagine that is kind of hard to find people now that can actually work with these type of projects. So, I mean, for them as well, I can understand why they were like, hello, like, because obviously it's not that easy to find someone who actually knows how to sew in these days. I mean, in Sweden, it's a rarity.
Yeah.
And I can also imagine in a smaller community like that. I mean, it can't be easy to find skilled craftspeople.
Yeah. So it's
Okay, well,
it's a very like the episode the timing of this episode as well. Like, I feel like it's a little bit like, am I gonna be discouraged after this episode, or am I gonna be intrigued and wanna try it out? We'll
Yeah.
see.
We'll
I will keep
see.
you
We'll
updated
see.
for sure how it goes. But before, I mean, we have a book to write and everything, so it's not like I'm gonna start
so
with
many
this
things.
next week or anything. Like,
Yeah.
I have some things we need to finish also before
Yeah.
going into this.
Yeah. That's the problem. You always have more ideas, and always, as we always talk about, the next shiny thing is always much more appealing than the things that
literally the shiny thing.
actually,
Yeah.
yeah, literally. True that. Oh, but we'll keep you updated then, dear listeners, on the what will happen with this thing. And back to today's topic, because as you said, we realized that we probably have to do a separate episode on this, because it is a very tricky fabric, kinds of fabrics. I guess, should we start when we say slippery fabrics, or fine fabrics? Maybe we should start by talking in general, or give a couple of examples of what type of materials that we are thinking about when we decided to do this episode.
Yeah, so this is, I mean, usually for more formal wear, like fancy dresses, or there could also be lining on jackets. Usually have a little bit more shine, a little bit more sheer fabric. fabrics, and could be silk, could be also polyester. Like there is a big variation in these types of fabric. So it could be anything from quite cheap to really expensive fabric. And I have written down like typical fabrics of this, but then of course every single fabric might have their own sub-genre with different types of name. So it's a little bit also like what kind of trend is in, what is in now, and how many different development of that kind of fabric are there. So this is more like a general overview. And we have mentioned this, I mean, in the previous episode when we talked about the different types of weaves, but I just want to refresh that. Satin weave, that's when the warp yarn are floating over several weft yarns. So it's in the warp direction that the yarns are floating. And sateen with SATEEN, that's when the warp yarn is floating. So it is, the yarns are floating in different direction, which is, I mean, you can see it with, if you know what you're looking for, you can see it. So satin is floating along the grain line, and sateen is floating perpendicular to the grain line. Is that the right word?
I think that's it. Yeah.
But then also like some of these fancier, thinner fabrics, they might also be just a plain weave or a crepe weave or something. So it doesn't have to be a sateen or, it can vary. But so here's, now I've been talking about different types of weave, how they are woven together basically. But there is also a type of fabric then that is called satin or sateen. So satin, as I mentioned, floating warp. So there are like very few interlaces with the weft yarn. This type of fabric has usually one really glossy side, and the other one is a little bit more dull, like the backside of the fabric. Very smooth, very drapey. And satin is all both. They are usually very drapey yarn, like they very like flexible, good movement in the yarn or in the weave. So it's like forms really easily around curves, but might also be stretched out if they are sewn a little bit on the bias. So this is where the tricky part comes in. The material can actually be like, it could be silk, it could be a synthetic fiber like polyester, rayon, but satin are usually more a filament fiber, which means it is like one long fiber that are often spun into a yarn and then woven together. While sateen is usually made out of cotton or linen, so it has more short, staple fiber that are spun together into a yarn. So it's a little bit not as smooth, you know. I mean, the difference between a silk and a cotton is more everyday feeling to the sateen fabric. I mean, yeah, it can be a little bit tricky to see the difference. Usually you don't need to know what the difference is, but if you see, it's not a typo. It's not like, oh, this country spell it like this and that country spell it like that. There are actually two different types of fabric, and obviously there can be a lot of sub types of these fabrics as well. But I think these are the two most common when it comes to fancier fabric, and can be a lot of variation of these as well. Have you sewn anything with satin or sateen fabric? And sorry if I'm butchering the pronunciation. I'm having different.
And honestly, also I will also be the first to confess that I'm not sure if that was satin or sateen that I worked with, but the answer is yes. I've sewn with fabric that has a kind of shiny surface. I mean, lots of times. It's a struggle, I would say. I mean, there's so many things. I mean, just the fact that it has this shiny surface, that means that when you're sewing together seams, it will shift because the coating is so slippery. So even then, and not to mention cutting, and I guess we should talk a little bit about how to work with those fabrics. So what are your experience with those shiny, slippery fabrics? Do you have any?
Yeah, I mean, cutting in single layer, I would say it's easier, because when you're folding it and cutting it on fold, it's so easy that the under layer is gonna slip away, or like it's not as easy to control, so that might be a little bit shifted then. Yeah, it's the cutting part can be a bit tricky, because the surface is so like slippery basically.
Yeah, totally. I agree with you. I would always cut single layer, and I think the best thing is if you have like a front, if you're making a blouse, for instance, you have a back piece that actually to mirror it so that you have a full piece. So for instance, if the pattern has like a half piece with a mid-back fold, then I would definitely mirror it so you have the full piece of both. We're going to show an image of that when we talk about it, but I think you know what I mean, because that would definitely help, because it's so tricky. Just you could do it half and then fold it over, but I think you have to, and also be really firm, so that make sure that the pattern is properly sits on the fabric, because just cutting it, regardless if you're using a pair of scissors or a rotary cutter, can also cause the fabric to shift a little bit. So I definitely use my hands and pattern weights and a combination of maybe books, heavy objects, I think, because it has a tendency of slipping in every sense of the word. It's amazing how difficult it is to cut, I think. So yeah, single layer would be the first suggestion. I would never cut anything double layer. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, if you have two sleeve pieces, I would not cut them in double layer. I would do a single one, and also one thing that once you have done the cutting, I would also double check. For instance, if I cut like two sleeve pieces, I would put them on top of each other and then put the pattern and make sure that they are reasonably even, because when you cut single layers, it's going to be a little bit tricky, that as well. And what other thing? Yeah, I mean, in general, just double check everything before you start working on it. And I would never ever hang, or I will keep all the fabric pieces flat on a table until I start working with them, because as soon as you start fiddling with them, or I mean, maybe you feel the impulse to maybe put them on a dress dummy and see how it looks, but even that can cause the fabric to start shifting a little bit, especially if it's cut on the bias. So that's probably the first thing, and secondly, I would definitely stay stitch if something are cut on the diagonals, such as the arm opening and the neckline, because I found that those have a tendency of growing a lot as well. So before you start sewing the collar, I would definitely stay stitch, which means that you sew a short straight stitch just to keep the pieces from stretching out, and then I would place the pattern piece on top of it to check the arms, the sleeve opening and the neck opening, to make sure that they still have the same measurement, so that because the problem is if the sleeve opening grows, it's going to be hard then when you try to add the other pattern pieces that they might not line up. So yeah, it's that will be a good prep work. I also know sometimes also people use spray starch when they are really desperate as a way of keeping the fabric in check, but then of course it has to be washable, and unfortunately a lot of these fabrics also have a tendency of not doing great with water wash, especially if it's silk involved, so it's a little bit tricky in that sense too.
Yeah, and also when sewing, like to avoid the seams from being stretched out, and to all. Here, I would change the needle before I would do anything, just because the needle can so easily damage the fabric. Like you get these running threads, and if you have a too not a sharp, like slightly damaged needle point, or if it's like a too big needle, it could really do some damage to the fabric. So here it's better to do it with a fresh needle and with a smaller needle, basically, so it doesn't create big holes when it's punctuating the fabric.
Yeah, very good advice. So I would go for like a 60-70 size, and I think what we call in Europe, I don't remember, I think it's 8 or 10 top of my head in the other measurements, but definitely do a sample. I think between 65 and 70 is probably a good idea. Yeah. It is tricky. And stitch length, what's your take on that? Because I think sometimes it's advised to have when you're sewing with very lightweight fabrics, to have a slightly shorter stitch length, I think. Am I correct? Do you know about this? Or do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, usually they are like really, not tightly weaved, but like very, since it's so delicate yarn that are woven together.
Lots of yarn per square centimeter, basically.
Yeah, you kind of mimic that when you do the stitch length as well, like have a little bit shorter, not too short, but a little bit shorter compared to if you're sewing a woven twill or something. So yeah, that could be a recommendation too.
Yeah, and also I am a big fan of hand basting when I'm working with slippery fabric. So for instance, because one problem that one will experience is the fact first of all, you don't want to overpin, because obviously the fabric is quite delicate. And then the thing is that when you start sewing, and because of the feed dogs and the presser foot, it has a tendency of wanting to push and shift. So it will very likely be quite difficult, especially if you're a little bit new to sewing, to control that the edges align. For instance, if you're sewing a side seam, that the edges will align, because I noticed that it can shift like several millimeters back and forth. So it's, to me, it's compared to, say, you're sewing with a twill fabric, it's so different. I mean, you have to be really, really good technician, I think, to be able to sew straight for an entire seam without having the fabric to shift. So in my case, I'm a big fan of basting. You could also use these wonder clips, which I use a lot, and we're going to post a picture of that as well. You can Google it as well, but it's little plastic clips that you can use instead of pinning, so you don't have to go crazy with the pinning. But I usually baste quite a lot, just to not have that problem.
Yeah, not maybe the most beginner-friendly fabrics to work with.
Yeah, and I would also say that, because we didn't really talk about that in the beginning, but you choose your pattern wisely as well. I would not do like a structured, if you're new to sewing with slipper fabrics. I mean, you can see these in stores. They look really nice, but I would not do, my first project would not be like a structured blouse or a shirt with a collar stand and a collar and cuffs, because it's just going to be so difficult to sew that kind of slippery fabrics. And you don't also you don't want to interface it too much either, because it changes the hand. So if I would do, I would definitely focus on a more of a simple silhouette, maybe something maybe cut on the bias, or a little bit detailed, because the fabric is so beautiful and usually has really lush colors and prints. I think you can get away with doing a really simple style of garments and just let the fabric speak, rather than adding too many darts or too many seams or like that, because it drapes so nicely, it can actually work without having too much construction, in my opinion. What do you think about that?
Yeah, totally agree. Usually these types of fabrics are used for more drapey, like flowy kind of garments. So really focus on that type, that silhouette is going to be so much easier compared to lots of seam darts and more structured type of garment. So yes, picking the right design is crucial here.
Yeah, and also speaking of seam finishes, because there's a little different ways of doing that as well. You could, of course, use French seam if you want to be a bit more advanced. French seams is where you sew the stitches twice. First you sew a small half of the seam allowance, basically. Then you flip the fabric over, and then you stitch a second row, and you basically enclose the raw edges inside that second seam. So if you want to sew something that looks really beautiful on the inside as well, then I think French seams are very suitable for this kind of fabrics. Also because it's so lightweight, that also means that it works very well with French seaming. They won't be bulky. And another thing, if you're not too fancy about it, I just use a serger. I think also that's really good to work. It's a very good, even better than zigzag stitch in my opinion. When you work,
I wouldn't do a zigzag stitch here. You kind of need a serger or blocker, just because these kind of fabrics they can fray also quite easily. So it will look a lot better with a serger compared to a zigzag.
Yeah. Yes, agree. Sometimes it also depends. I mean, I like to, for instance, if I'm sewing the side seam for a blouse with slippery fabrics, I usually don't overcast both sides separately. Instead, I first sew the straight seam, the side seam along the seam line, and then I actually like to serge both layers at the same time. I find that really helpful, and that also makes it a little bit easier to work with, because then you're able to ensure that the edges are evenly, they look evenly. So I don't think it's necessary. You don't have to press it apart.
No. I think it's also add a more security to it. Like if the fabric is easily, there is a lot of stretch on the seam, like it could be torn apart basically, and especially if you just have one seam then and pressed open the seam allowance, this overlock will also help prevent that. And also the fabrics are so thin that it will not create extra bulk that they are overlocked together. I mean, on denim, then you want to press them apart because the fabric is so heavy, but I mean, this is the polar opposite.
Yeah, totally.
You won't have thickness an issue here.
No. That's the appeal and the scary thing. I mean, thick fabrics are usually easier to work with. I mean, that is definitely cool. And I should also mention, it depends on what type of fabric. You can of course use fusible interfacing, but if the fabric is very lightweight or more sheer, I'm a big fan of using silk organza instead. And that means that you cannot fuse it because it's obviously a fabric. So I use that a lot. If you would go against the advice and want to add a collar or a collar stand or something like that, then you have to stabilize it in some way. And then I'm a really big fan of using silk organza because it adds stability, but it doesn't change the hand of the fabric because you still retain that softness. So that's what I prefer, and I do that a lot because I do like to work with those lightweight fabrics. I'm such a masochist. I'm a stickler for suffering, but so that's just a tip, and I would definitely look that up. I bought a piece maybe 10 years ago, and I still have some left because you just need those tiny pieces. So you would only do that, and maybe if you're doing cuffs, for instance.
And then it becomes like a separate layers, basically.
Instead
of 2 layers of fabric, you have 3 layers of fabric, so that's wedged in between. And also because
it's more
if
like
you
an
use
interlining,
exactly. Yeah, if you use like glued interfacing, those glues might actually show through because the fabric might be so thin. So always do a test if you are used glued interfacing because it might come through. So it's not be careful with that, even though you would like to make it more stable all over. But
But that's not the point of the fabric. I guess you have to
No,
work with it,
exactly.
not against it. I guess that's probably the kind of main advice that I'm just gonna say in the background now. Apologies because I work in a space where someone is also doing a lot of handiwork, and I can feel it so in the background. So it's like a lot of banging going around. And
Construction site.
yeah, exactly. So I will apologize for the background noise, but that's the reality of making this podcast. And I guess one thing that is, we talked about seams, but to me also a big struggle is the hemming of this kind of materials, right?
Yeah.
Mm,
Yeah, because you don't want the seam to be stretched out, so the hem becomes wavy. And usually, if you have like a wider skirt, the hem is going to be rounded. It's not going to be like straight along along the not grain line, but perpendicular to the grain line. So if it's going to be rounded, it's really easily going to be stretched out and wavy. So here we can do. Well, first I recommend that you. Contradictory to what Johanna said about not hanging the fabric on a dummy or anything so it stretches out. If you have sewn a wider skirt, for example, or a dress, you should hang it after it's sewn before you hem it, because it can stretch out a little bit different. So the fabric that is on the grain line, basically the sides, are usually going to be stretched out a little bit more because the fabric is so heavy. So let it be on a hanger, or preferably if you actually have a dress form, so the fabric can stretch out as it will be. And then after that, there are this special tool that if you have the dress on a dressing form, there's like a little. It looks like a, how do you say? You puff that you blow out.
Yeah, it's like a
dust.
stand with like a shark puffer.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's a very fascinating thing, and I maybe we could find some picture of this. But it's a very. Do you own one of these? I don't own one of these. No,
I have never used one. That's the one that they do when they have bridal dresses.
Right.
Yes.
So maybe who knows? Maybe you're going to be really proficient with the shark puffer.
Exactly. I need.
But
to
it's
try
a
that one
brilliant
out.
invention because it's a stand, and then you just move that. Puffer around, and that keeps it, we say, perpendicular, or I guess the correct word, because if you would, as you say, when you put it flat, then it's going to be distorted. But you want it to, when you hang it and wear on, but that's what you're aiming for. You want it to look good hanging, not lying flat, which what you would normally do when you would hem, I guess. So
yeah, exactly.
it
Yeah.
seems like a really clever tool.
Yeah. So you basically go around the hem and draw a line, basically, so it's even all around, and then you after that cut it and hem it. And the funny thing is, I mean, depending a little bit on the fabric, if you have a tulle dress, you don't actually even need to hem it. You just cut the hem raw, because that kind of a fabric doesn't fray. But you can also have a really thin overlock seam. I think it's called like a baby lock hem. The name may vary a little bit. But it's like,
narrow. I think in my sewing manual it's called like a narrow overlock.
Yeah,
Or,
I mean, you basically, when
so
you sew with an overlock, still 4 threads, you have like a little shift thing, a little metal thing that is like pulled into the seam, that makes the loops a little bit wider, but you remove this when you want to do a narrow, so then it basically, the seam is squished together. Usually most overlockers have this little metal thing that you shift back and forth. So it is pretty easy to do a more narrow overlock seam. Sometimes you can have 3 threads as well, not 4, make it even smaller, and maybe a little bit tighter stitch length, so it looks nice, like you can't really see the separate threads in the hem. And if you want to do folded hem, usually if the dress is like rounded at the bottom, you kind of need to have like one of those rolling hem presser foot that actually is folding the fabric by itself. Because if you are gonna fold it, because you want that hem to be really small, because the wider it is, you can't fold a wide hem on a rounded bottom edge. So you want to have a quite narrow hem. So there are these special presser foot for these types of hem. So yeah, I would say those three are the main. But you can also like have a binding at the bottom, at the edge as well, in similar same fabric. If you have a bias tape or something, so there are different options to this. Yeah. So I think you really need to not have your mind set on you want this type of hem. It's more like, okay, what kind of fabric is it? What kind of shape does the hem have? And you need to adjust according to that. Yeah, very good advice. I just looked it up. Converter, I think it's called on a serger. The little thing that you flip.
Makes it wider or less wide. Yeah, because it's so different stitch. It's a little bit different on different sergers, but I think you say omvandlare, I think in Swedish, but I guess not many people that say to a lot of people. Yeah, and I agree with you. And a while back, I talked about the blouse I sewed this summer, and I used this technique because I had lots of struggles with the sleeve, and it's a very fine rayon fabric that also has had a lot of drape that were cut on the bias. And I mean, that having that narrow overlock stitch is such a game changer. And if you keep, as you say, the stitch length tight enough, the thread is going to cover everything, so it becomes like a really beautiful finishing, and there won't be any threads peeking through. And you can on the overlock you actually have two options. You can either use that narrow overlock that we talked about, but you can also do the rolled hem overlock, so that means it comes a little bit thicker, but it's still very, very narrow. And if you use matching thread and don't look too close, I think it's actually, it doesn't how shall I say, it doesn't bring the garment down. It actually adds a nice finishing. So, I mean, if you don't have an overlocker and you want to sew with slippery fabric, it's time to get an overlocker. I mean, because we love sewing with knits, so that's also good. And if you don't, especially, you can, of course, do a lot of hand sewing as well. You can, and I've done that a couple of times. I've actually hand sewn a narrow hem on a dress made with a silk velvet, and then the sleeves were made of silk chiffon. So I like to punish myself clearly. But yeah, that took a lot of movies to finish.
I can understand
that project. So an overlock is such a good way of moving that, and also, as you mentioned, the rolled hem presser foot. I think that's definitely a bit of a tricky presser foot. I tried to use it, but I've noticed that it's easily that the fabric has a tendency of shifting, which is also a problem because, as you say, you work on the bias, it's rounded, so there's always a risk that the seam will end up a little bit twisted, where you push the one layer of the fabric forward and the other one stays back. So again, I think you're going to need to practice on a few scraps before you start working on that, because you don't want to end up sewing halfway through and then it's like this really shifted look and doesn't kind of brings the garment down. Because that's the problem, I guess, also with slippery fabrics, is the fact that every finishing has to be like top notch and pristine, because it's so glaring, because you're working with such an unforgiving fabric that every little thing that it looks a little bit off kind of brings the overall look down, which is again a reason why maybe this is not a beginner friendly project. I mean, grow your skills on other things, and when you feel ready to suffer for a bit, then it's time to start tackling these kind of fabrics.
Yeah, don't be afraid to do practice runs. I mean, you kind of have to do that before you go go into the real fabric, or you practice on the real fabric as well, but your project. So have a little bit of extra fabric to practice on.
Yeah, and always do a narrow hem as well, regardless of what kind of method you are doing. Do not do a wide hem. Yeah, I mean, I never more than 1 centimeter, and probably about 5 millimeters, 1/4 of an inch is probably a good width for a hem. One thing that I like to do, for instance, when I'm sewing blouses using slippery fabrics, I like to do actually a double folded hem. If the hem is not too curved, So what I do is that I 5 millimeters in roughly, I sew a straight stitch, and then I use that as my guide for pressing, so that I know that it will be even, and I don't need to finish the edge with the serger before that, because it's going to be enclosed. So I stitch that, I fold along that stitch line, then I fold it over a second time so that the raw edges are enclosed, and then I stitch over it, because it's so easy to get a precise. I have not found any other way of getting a narrow seam that precise. We're using that, and we will post on our Instagram account, Stitching Tales Pod, where I show this method. I have a tutorial on my blog as well that I will link to.
And
so
I've
that's
seen
also,
this method, but they, instead of sewing a straight stitch, they actually used the overlock seam.
Clever.
So yeah,
Clever.
because then also it will add a little bit of thickness, so it's actually a little bit easier to fold it twice as well. I mean, obviously
Totally.
it's wasting a little bit of thread, but it might be worth it to get this really. Yeah, it's easier basically when you have it a little bit thicker, that you get a template for how to fold it basically.
Yeah, very good idea. And also, whenever you, as I mentioned, regardless of using a rolled hem or whenever you're sewing on a sewing machine, for instance, there will always be a risk that you will get those twisted seams or almost like drag lines because of the uneven feeding of a sewing machine. So you should definitely try Malena's favorite tips, adjusting the presser foot pressure to make sure that it doesn't push the upper layer of the fabric forward. You could also use a walking foot, because that helps make the feeding easier, and I do that a lot. Or you can use another method which I show on my blog, and I'll try to link to that as well, where I use a sharp object to basically push the upper layer of the fabric towards the presser foot if I'm using just a regular presser foot and not a walking foot, because I found that all these methods help to prevent that fabric from shifting forwards. And that's the pro of using a serger, because then you have the differential feed and you can adjust the speed of the feed hooks and how that pushes the fabric through. So you won't have that same problem if you're using a serger for hemming than you will have a sewing machine. So again, it's definitely comes down to practice and using the right techniques and tools. I mean, a little bit twisting is fine, because as you know, if you go and look even like high-end silk shirts, you will see that slight twisting on the hem, because it's basically impossible to avoid if you're using a regular sewing machine. I don't know. I've not seen I haven't seen like Gucci shirts or like the Chanel blouses or something like that. But if you're like at least in the more accessible higher end, you can still see those twisted seams, which goes to show how difficult it is, because people who are specializing in this kind of fabrics are still having problems with these kind of seams.
Yeah, it is. It is a little bit like the characteristics of these type of fabric. But a couple of more other fabrics that falls into this fancy category. You mentioned organza already. Organza is a really thin fabric. Usually it's just a plain weave. It can be silk or synthetic. And the main thing about organza, it is quite stiff. For it being so thin and sheer, it doesn't drape so easily. So you can get pretty easily, like you get volume with this type of fabric. So it's a pretty, it's an interesting material. Almost see-through, but still has that, how do you say? It doesn't
body
drape.
or stiffness to it.
Stiffness.
Yeah, because it looks like I can imagine if you look at it online and have not worked with this kind of fabrics before and you order it, you might expect something softer like chiffon, or crepe Georgette, I think it's called. Then you're going to be a little bit disappointed because it doesn't have that softness or the hand. So it's gonna, if you make a blouse, it's going to stand straight out. It won't drape or fall softly towards the body, so it's just a completely different look.
Yeah, and as you mentioned chiffon, also very light fabric, see-through. This one usually have like, sure, it can be a little bit like shimmery, the fabric, but it's usually more matte, dull finish. It doesn't have like that shine to it as these other one have. But the fabrics usually really like have a heavy drape, like they have a really nice fall to it. So these swooshy dresses, they are usually in chiffon, has like really nicely draped bodice, and yeah, it can be really beautiful, but oh my, this is the one that when you are cutting it out, I think chiffon is the most difficult to stabilize, basically.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy because I sewn a fair share of chiffon blouses, and I mean just getting the hem like even. It's, I don't know what's happening. Sometimes when I cut this and the hem keeps getting shorter and shorter because I have to keep heaving it out. And then it gets crooked on the other side, and I'm like, how hard can it be? It's impossible. I mean, I love the kind of garment, as you say. They look so nice and they flow so nicely and they're wonderful to wear. But man, not fun fabric to cut.
Yeah, this one, it does have it minds its own mind. It's gonna do what it ever wants. So yeah,
it's a very alive and kicking fabric. It has if fabric could be a living being, I guess that's probably what chiffon is.
Absolutely. Another fabric that also is like really not the more advanced, charmeuse.
Oh wow!
This is also really usually like, it's a very light fabric. The right side is really shiny. The wrong side is a little bit more matte. It could be like silk, polyester, rayon. It's a satin weave, but it has like a different ratio of floating yards compared to a regular satin weave. But this one is also really shifty fabric. But it could be, really. It is the one that you really. It shines in the store, and you just want to, stroke it. But be aware, chiffon and charmeuse are really tricky fabrics to work with.
Yeah, I agree. Silk charmeuse is the devil. I mean, we use this term on a lot of fabric, but they're quite similar in that way. And I think the biggest problem with charmeuse is that it has beautiful prints, it has beautiful colors, and they're not. If you go into a fabric store, these fabrics stands out because there's such a wonderful, rich colors, and the shine, and it's totally mesmerizing. So I get it. Why?
Yeah, that's how they lure you in.
Out of that. Yeah, but be aware. Be aware. I mean, we are not saying that you shouldn't do it again. But I think being mindful of what kind of thing you are tackling and adjust accordingly. And as we said, pick the right kind of pattern. Again, I would not. So, I mean, you can of course see in higher end designers doing like silk charmeuse shirts in silk charmeuse, but I would not do that as a starter project. I would definitely pick something. I don't know what I would do. Handkerchief. I don't know.
A fabric that is
that would be difficult. You have to do a rolled hem, so I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a fabric that is easier to work with. Taffeta.
Taffeta.
Yeah,
taffeta. I don't know how to pronounce it, but
that one it has a little bit the same. It reminds me of organza, but it's not sheer or see-through or anything. Taffeta is more really tightly woven. Has more crisp, usually just a plain weave. Still a very shiny surface. It could be also pretty common. I've seen or maybe that was like 20 years ago, that the warp and the weft have different colors. So it has like this shine to it, like it shimmers in two different colors. I made my graduation dress in taffeta that I sewed. It's, I think it was like a trend, a pretty strong trend, again, 20 years ago. I'm not sure how trendy it is today.
You know, I never sewed anything in taffeta, I think, but how would you rate that, like from a difficulty standpoint, compared to the other type of fabrics that we have talked about?
So much easier. I mean, really, so
nice.
much easier. Yeah. I mean, this is more crisp. It's like a poplin of these fancy fabric. It's a crispier fabric, so it's so it doesn't shift at all in the same way as the charmeuse does. It's more stiff. It also has a little bit more bodice to it, same as organza. Like it doesn't drape in that same way. It's a stiffer fabric basically. So in that sense, it's a lot easier to use. And here again, I mean, it could be raw silk taffeta is like a very like this also. The yarn is like different thickness a little bit, so it can have this structure in it, or it could be also a polyester and have really like even level surface. So there are like a lot of different taffeta as well. But yeah, so much easier to to handle, hands down.
Maybe we should bring back taffeta, because I don't think it's
not a
big thing
now. No, I don't think so either.
I do get almost, because I mean you're too young for that, but I always get like an 80s vibe from taffeta.
100%, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And it's just a different style, and I guess with, you know, it's much more softness and like plain things today. With garments, it's not so much those kind of stiff and structured garments, but it's nice to hear that taffeta is much more easy to sew. So maybe we need a taffeta trend, so that we can actually sew luxurious fabric without having to lose our minds.
Exactly. And again, like it depends on what kind of what you want. Like this is great if you want to create volume, because it doesn't fall down drape. It doesn't have a heavy drape. It stands out instead. So if you want to create more volume in your dress skirt, this is it's a good fabric for it. And usually you could also have like tulle layer underneath to really create that volume. Tulle is it's not on my list because usually tulle is knit. It's not a regular knit, but it's like a warp knit. Like it's knitted in a different. It's a little bit different construction on it, but tulle is
it's like a knitted net basically.
Yeah, exactly. But that one you usually also it's more like an underlayer, or you could have it as skirt as well in many layers, because it can be really, really see-through. But when you gather it creates really volume. So you usually have it as a underlayer fabric to create volume. So tulle is really often used when it comes to fancy wear. But then another fabric, crepe. Crepe is also a weave. It's kind of, if you look at it on like black and white, like how it is woven together, it kind of looks like a twill, but you can't see that effect on the real fabric. Crepe, there are different types of crepe fabric as well. Crepe de chine, lots of different types. But crepe is pretty easy to spot, I would say, because that surface is like, it doesn't have like a shine to it. It's like crinkled, pebbled, like
a matte finish.
But it has like a structure. It's not the fabric that is dull like a chiffon, but it's actually like a 3D structure to it. And this is usually created by like the yarn is so heavily twisted, so it creates this surface, and it has a really matte finish usually, and it's not like see-through like chiffon. So crepe is also very, I think, it's a really nice fabric. Both the way, I mean, it could be silk, it could be anything basically. I have a really nice tencel crepe shirt. It gives a very nice structure to it, I think. Have you sewn anything with crepe?
Yeah, absolutely. I've sewn quite a few things. I do like, working with like crepe de chine, the silk fabric, because as you say, I'm actually a bit more drawn to that kind of like matte surface rather than the super shiny charmeuse surface for my own preference and
those
style.
can look a little bit cheap as well, since usually typically maybe you can afford it in synthetic fiber, but it kind of gives a
Yeah.
So crepe is
it's a slippery slope, literally. Yeah, but so I think also, and some of these silk crepes are also quite nice to wash because of the surface is already a little bit coarse compared to that shiny. I've noticed that it usually deals better with water as well, because you already have that kind of finishing on it. So in my opinion, I wouldn't say it's easy fabric to sew with, but we were talking about silk here, but it's easier than those satin or charmeuse finishes for sure.
And also just
so
like
again, if you
the structure, the structure in the fabric, they physically can't slip against like each other. Then it sticks a little bit together then, and a little bit easier
like
too.
In that way, because they're gonna stick together.
Teeny tiny Velcro.
Very, very tiny, very expensive Velcro.
No, but it's it has a really nice, as I said, dull surface, but it still have like a really nice shine to it in a way. Like it's really, it's such a nice finish, and there can be like chiffon crepe as well. Like the sheerness of it can vary. So there are like lots of different subtypes of this fabric. But crepe, it's a favorite of mine as well. And two other like really fancy Charchette and Duchesse. Charchette is also a type of crepe fabric. It has puckered surface, same again, but it's more sheer compared to crepe. And Duchesse satin, really tight woven satin weave, heavier, more luxurious. A little bit pearly, semi-sheer usually, or semi-shine to it. This is like the bridal wear, fancy, royal type of fabric. So the luxe version.
Yeah, it's such a, maybe that's what kind of fabric you will get more acquainted with in the future. Then we'll see.
We'll see, yeah.
We'll see.
And to finish...
The Duchess of Duchesse, that's Malena.
We'll see, yeah. And to finish off, I have three type of fabric that are a little bit more everyday type of fabric, but they are kind of similar, so it's like a little own group. And it's voile, lawn, and batiste. They are usually more like cotton-ish wear, like more everyday summer wear. So lawn is comb cotton, a little bit crisp and not so see-through. Batiste is more sheer, smooth, fine compared to voile, and voile is then it's not as sheer as batiste, but it has like more smooth. It's smoother than lawn. They are very, very similar. It's just like small differences between them. But usually it's more like cotton, plain weave, very think summer dresses, and all are like thinner compared to a regular cotton fabric. So but very quickly explain now this. And again, every single fabric might have their own,
subgroups.
Very many, depending on who is manufacturing them, what type of material they are made of. Because now these are types of fabric. It doesn't say anything about if it is a polyester, if it's silk, or if it is cotton. A satin could be everything basically. So yeah, it's a jungle out there.
Yeah, I mean it really is, and I mean this is so great that you do this run through because, I mean, as we talked about here, there are subtle differences, and you might feel that, okay, but I'm buying a silk fabric or a cotton fabric, but that says so little because the key is often what type of fabric, the weave or knit, because that's what determines, how it is to work with and what type of garment you should make, for instance. So I think that's really good to talk about, not just fibers, because that's just scratching the surface literally when it comes to fabric choices. And I would also just say that I'm a big fan of those, as you mentioned, the cotton batiste and voile and especially lawn, which is Liberty Lawn is probably the most famous brand, the British manufacturer that makes these beautiful prints on cotton. I think it's called Liberty Lawn. It's a dream to. It's like a refined quilting fabric, I would say, almost with a softness and a sheen. So if you want something that feels a little bit more luxe, but it's still easy to sew, I would say graduate to cotton lawn before you start working with the more advanced slippery fabrics that we have talked about in this episode. That's my advice, at least, because then you get all the beautiful prints and colors as well.
Yeah, it's yeah. I don't know if I'm more intrigued or interested or scared after this episode. Yeah. I don't know.
No, I don't know either, but then I also realized, because when we do this episode, my mind always also thinks about the content brain is working. So I'm like, oh, what kind of photos are we going to post on our Instagram account? Then I realized that almost all the fabrics that we mention here, I've sewn garments. I noticed that I'm like, and I say that I deplore working with these kind of. It's horrible, and then I realized
you can check all of them. It's like done that, done that.
Like that, yeah. So I'm definitely going to post a few photos of those makes for sure. It's just that I think because I love everything luxury. I guess that's why I'm so drawn to this kind of fabrics. Even though I always have a mid-through breakdown every time, like a mid, and I just want to toss it all away. And sometimes I will also say, I do end up unhappy a few times. It has definitely happened where things has not gone as planned. I will be the first to admit. But with years of experience, there are less and less like those mishaps, and more finished garment that I'm happy with.
Yes, and my final tip here is again the needle, because when I made that graduation dress in taffeta, it was during a sewing course that I went with together with my mom, and she was sewing these baskets out of what do you say, coffee. Not coffee filter, but the coffee packages.
The bags, so like the hemp coarse weave.
You cut them open and then you can sew them into a bag. That was a thing 20 years ago. Yeah. And we took turn using the machine. Same needle. Not a good idea. What? Obviously the needle was damaged when she sewed those through those coffee bags. And then I go and sew the center front seam of the top in this taffeta with a slightly damaged needle, and it created these, it pulled the thread.
Wow.
Yeah. So change the needle.
Change the needle.
They say that, change needle with every project, and do people do that? No. But when you sew with fancy fabric, you need to change to a new, fresh needle.
Yeah. 100%. Wow, what a scary story.
Yeah, and what a stupid thing to do. These two things are great to combine, sewing the same thing, same needles.
Yeah, it's also, we like to make it easy for ourselves. What is it? Just a needle. How big of a difference can it be? A couple of sizes up or down. And I'm like, yeah, massive.
Massive, yeah. And I think it was more like damaging, not the size of the needle, but that it was actually damaged. So it really caught those yarns and pulled, snagged instead
of just cutting a nice sharp hole. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, let's finish with a success story from the past.
Dang.
I will redeem myself
that
and
you
do a
all
better
feel
work in the future, I promise.
Yeah, that's why we do the mistake, so you don't have to.
Exactly. We'll never do that again.
All right then. Never do that again. No, and I feel like, yeah, I mean, I've done so many. I don't know. Sometimes the brain just doesn't work. I mean, it sounds easy on paper, but then you're like, what?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, I've done that too. I forgot. I've sewn some denim project, and then I was like, oh, yeah, I probably had the universal needle in, and then like, bang. Yeah.
Happens to the best of us.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. But with those words, thank you so much again, Malena, for sharing so much of your knowledge. And I hope that everyone is listening has got some realistic expectations and a lot of actionable advice on how to tackle slippery fabrics in the future. I don't feel discouraged. I feel, I feel we can do this. We are here to help.
Yeah, I mean, try. Maybe not the first project
Yeah.
you sew if you're a beginner, but yeah, of course. You can sew in these fabrics. They are there for a reason. So don't be afraid to try. Just choose the right type of garment for it, so it's a suitable match.
Yeah, good final words. Thank you so much for listening. I am Johanna Lundström.
And I am Malena Hjerpe. Bye bye.
Bye bye.